Verbs are the action words in the sentence that describe what the subject is doing. Without a verb, the meaning of the sentence is not going to be complete. And by the way, a verb can be a sentence by itself. Like when I say sing, ride, run. So it's very important to know or to add or to use a verb in a sentence to be complete. So how can we recognize a verb, that this word is a verb? You can ask yourself, can I run? So run is a verb. Can I walk? Can I read? Can I write? So from the meaning or from the answer of your question, you will understand that this is a verb. You can also ask yourself, what is happening? Hani is running. Dina is singing, and so on. You will understand that those words refer to actions. So I understand that they are verbs. How many kinds of verbs do we have? We have physical verbs, or we can call them action verbs. We have mental verbs, or verbs of states. Physical verbs, or action verbs, we use them to refer to physical actions, like run, sit, read, write, call, hear, and so on. All of these referring to actions when you move your body, doing an action, so we call them action verbs. We have another kind of verbs, which is mental verbs, related to your mental states, such as discovering, understanding, thinking, planning. So it relates to your concepts, to your mental state. So we call them mental verbs. Or in general, we call them stated verbs because they refer to your state, not your movements or actions. So just like know, recognize, love, hate, prefer, all of these are stated verbs. We have another kind of verbs which we call states of being verbs. And it's also known as linking verbs, especially for the forms of verb to be, am, is, are. Just like when I say, I am a student, we are circus performers. Am and are here are verbs of being verbs, states of being verbs, okay? So, what are the types of verbs? As we have said, action verbs and verbs of states. And these are examples of action verbs, run, dance, fly, jump, and so on. And stated verbs, or verbs that showing a state, love, prefer, hate, and so on. Do we have other kinds of verbs? Yes, we have transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. Transitive verbs simply are verbs followed by an object. Verbs which are followed by objects. Like when we say, let me give you an example over here. Gary ate the cookies. Gary here is the subject. Ate is the verb, the cookies is the object. So we have here the object, the cookies, and the verb ate here is a transitive verb because it's followed with the object, the cookies. Okay. The second kind of verbs, we call it intransitive verbs. Intransitive verbs are action verbs that always express doable activities, and they are different from transitive verbs because they aren't followed by an object or by objects in general. There is no direct object following an intransitive verb. Like when I say, I sneeze in the morning, he arrived with moments to spare. There is no object, so we consider it intransitive verbs. We have another kind of verbs, which is auxiliary verbs, or we call them helping verbs, like verb to be, would, should, do, can, could, may. Modal verbs, all the modal verbs actually, we use them as an auxiliary verb. And the stative verbs, stative verbs can be recognized because they express a state of mind, a state of feeling, expressing emotions, believing, wanting, being, and so on. All of these verbs, we call them stative verbs because we don't move our body when we do these actions. And modal verbs are auxiliary verbs showing abilities, possibilities, permissions, and so on. Obligation, can, must, may, should, and would, and so on. We call them auxiliary verbs or modal verbs. We have other kinds of verbs, which is phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs, they are combinations of words that are used together to make on different meaning. That to that of the original verb. Like when I say run out, go all out, make out, it carries a different meaning from the word, from the two words, or from these different words. Okay, like Mary looked forward to her high school reunion. He brought up the same points again and again, and so on. So when we mix a verb with a preposition or with another word, we call it phrasal verbs. And of course, at last, you know the meaning of irregular verbs. And the irregular verbs are those that don't take on a regular spelling pattern of the past simple or the past participle. I think you studied this when you were young, just like eat, ate, eaten, think, thought, thought, and so on. You know lots of examples of those irregular verbs.